Hello and welcome back to the Wimbledon of chess, to the Tata Steel chess masters from the Netherlands, from Bijkensee. And now we are continuing with Magnus Carlsen again, and an especially very typical game of Magnus Carlsen when he is just pushing on forever. And we will see whether he manages to succeed. His opponent is actually sort of not from the best guys. His name is Antón Guijarro, who is rated about like 200 rating point less than Magnus Carlsen is. So Carlsen absolutely needs to go for the win, even with the black pieces. So let's go to the game. So it starts with e4, and as usually, if you want to win with black, then you play the Sicilian. You start with c5. Now comes knight f3, knight c6, and well, Carlsen is known to play the so-called Sveshnikov, which would arise after d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, and e5. But actually his opponent David Anton did not want to enter these lines, and he plays a usual trick of order, which comes with knight c3. And so here black has two main moves to go on with. One that Carlsen actually sort of likes is e5. However, in this opening, it is very hard to win with the black pieces. So for that reason, Carlsen actually goes on with g6. And now we are entering the so-called dragon territory. So comes d4, takes and takes. And as spectators, well, dragon is one of the sharpest lines that could be played. So we should be actually quite happy. So now comes bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6. And well, unfortunately here we are going to be a bit disappointed, because the main and sharpest line would be bishop c4, and then the players would castle opposite side and everybody would go after the opponent's king. However, David Anton plays the move knight b3, which is quite a positional way to continue. And the white does not have the intention of checkmating the world champion. So now comes d6, f3, and bishop e6, the best computer line. And now the plan is simply just to play d5, and white can absolutely do nothing about this. And actually the opening is pretty sure not going to go into white favor. So now comes queen d2, and immediately comes d5. And after bishop b5, d takes e4, some exchange on the d file, and f takes e4. And actually already we can see that white not just didn't achieve anything, but actually he's going to be the one who tries to equalize after this, because his e4 pawn is actually quite weak. The e5 square is a beautiful outpost for one of the knights of black. Already the black pieces are quite developed. So actually already black is doing quite nicely. And after bishop d7 castle, there comes the move knight g4, immediately attacking this bishop, and white is actually already in quite a bit of trouble. So you have to obviously guard this f2 square, so you can only go to c5 or g1, but c5 looks a lot better. And here Carlsen can just ruin the pawn structure of white with bishop takes c3. Comes b takes c3, and well, here actually even Carlsen makes a small mistake. The best move here would have been just to play knight ce5, offering the trade of these bishops. And black is just clearly better. The pawn structure, these pawns are very weak. The black knights are just super strong. So black is basically just simply better. But he plays the move b6, and after bishop g1 comes knight ce5, and here David Anton can go back to bishop d3. The point of bishop d3 is obviously, well, you want to keep your bishop, and if black would take on d3, then you take back with the pawn, and finally your pawn structure is not so bad anymore. So here Carlsen played the move bishop a4, and after bishop d4, Carlsen made a sort of interesting decision. So he felt like he doesn't have much in the position at the moment, so he started to simplify, and he played the move that I just mentioned. That's probably not the best idea. He just exchanges on d3 with the idea that after c takes d, he actually going to further simplify the position with rook takes d4. And the idea is that now you can't really take with the knight, because then bishop takes d1 comes, and then the knight jumps in. So you take with the pawn, and after knight f2, king d2, some exchange, we actually reach to this position. So here, if we stop for a second, so the material is actually equal, but we can see that black has a bishop against the white knight, and also black has this queenside majority, while white's pawns are a little bit crammed in the center, and also it's not very easy to make a pass pawn out of these. So optically you could say that black is doing better, but actually the computer says that white should have no problem holding this. But of course, Carlsen has no intention to just make a draw. He's going to go on for quite a while. So here's actually black's move, and Carlsen starts out with a very nice move. So here I actually invite you to stop the video and try to find this very strong positional move that Carlsen makes. So the point is that actually at the moment this b3 knight is quite bad, and these pawns in the center are also well, you have to make sure that these pawns are actually not advancing. So white would really like to play the move d5 and then put the knight on d4, having a very good control over the center, and the knight on d4 would be a beautiful piece. So for that reason, Carlsen plays the very strong move e6, taking away this d4 square. So now if you play d5 with white, then you would actually just end up with the double isolated pawns in the center, which is not a good idea. So you can't play d5. But here actually also David Anton with the white pieces plays a very nice move, and so again I actually invite you to stop the video and try to figure out how to continue. So as I said, white's problem, if he has any, is this b3 knight. So his plan of d5 was actually stopped, but he can now reroute the knight in another way, plays the move knight c1, and after knight e2 and knight c3, the knight is going to have a beautiful place on c3, and the game goes on this way. The knight goes there, bishop goes back, and actually he plays the move a4. And sort of the trick is that if you take on a4, then white goes on with rook a1, and after b5, there comes knight c3. But actually, Carlsen could have also tried this position, because after, say, e5, knight takes, b takes, and rook e1, rook a4, you can put your rook behind the pawn, and then, well, actually this ending is not very easy to draw with white. But this is not what Carlsen had in mind. He played the move rook c8, occupying the open line. And that's actually, as white, you don't necessarily want to exchange rooks. So right now you are going to lose your a4 pawn if you exchange rooks, so you shouldn't really do that. But in principle, so you should keep the rooks, because the bishop is even more strong if it's only against the knight. If there are more pieces on the board, then the dominance of the bishop over the knight is not that apparent. So now comes knight c3, and Carlsen plays the move f5. Now comes rook b1, and Carlsen decides to make the matter clear in the center. He takes first on e4 and plays the move e5. So now it's quite clear that white are going to have two sort of weaknesses, one on e4, one on a4. Both are on the light square, so the black bishop can attack them. But at the same time, the white king is going to get active. So now comes king d3, and after exchanging, white actually has this beautiful king on d4. Now comes rook c5, knight d5 check, king f7, rook f1 check, king g7. So we can see that even though white has quite some weaknesses, these pieces are very, very active, and Carlsen has a hard time making any progress. So now the knight goes back to guard the weaknesses, bishop e6, and here comes knight b5, trying to, well, both attack this pawn, but also try to come in and maybe create some counterattack against this black king, and also maybe someday this pawn can also be pushed. So now comes rook c2, attacking this pawn, and here David Anton goes further with king e5, bishop g8, and just protects the pawn. So here now the black pawn is also hanging. Carlsen makes the move a5. Knight comes in, and comes bishop b3 attacking this pawn. Now comes rook b1, bishop a4, rook b6, and rook g2. So seemingly white has just lost a pawn, but his pieces are still incredibly active. These are all in the center. He can easily grab this a5 pawn at some point. He still has this e pawn to actually push to get some counterplay. So now the game goes on with h4, rook h2, and actually this was move 40, so they had actually white had, so Carlsen didn't have such time trouble, but white had a bit of a time trouble. So now again David Anton gets another, I think, 50 minutes, which is a good thing to think. So now comes rook a6, exchanging these pawns, and bishop d1. So again, if we stop for a second, we can see that black actually has 2 pawns on the king side. They are both actually passed pawns, so connected passed pawns, but white is just incredibly active. All these pieces, plus his rook can also go to a7, the king can probably come in and push further. So actually I forgot to point out a tactical motive. So at this point it seems like that white just plundered his rook, because rook h5, but there is actually a counter attack. You can play knight f5 check, and after g takes f5, rook a4, f takes e4 check. Now you don't blunder your rook again, you just sidestep with your king, and then you are going to take this pawn, and obviously the h pawn alone is not going to be enough to win the game. So exactly for this reason, CARLSEN again pushes onward as he always does. So after rook a5, no check, but bishop d1 comes. Now comes rook a1, rook h1, and now the white knight enters, knight e8 check. And now the black king has to come up, because if you go backwards, then the white is just too active. So the knight would jump back, and then the rook comes in, and that doesn't lead anywhere. So you have to go forward, and now comes knight f6. The king goes up, and now comes rook a7. Actually another beautiful trick by CARLSEN. So here I invite you to stop the video and figure out what the trick was here. So seemingly it looks like that the game is just about to end in a draw, because white can simply take on h7, and when black takes back, there comes rook takes d1, and well, just one pawn against one pawn with rooks. However, black has this very sneaky rook e7 check, and this actually decides the game. Black would win, because if you go to a normal place like d4, then you just losing your rook, and if you go forward to d6, which is your only move, essentially not to lose your rook, after rook e4, your king is cut, and actually this ending is supposed to be lost. So very nice trick from CARLSEN, but David Anton is watching out for this, and he doesn't take on the pawn, just plays rook a7. Then black pushes, knight h7 check. Now the king actually has to go back to guard these squares. It's a lot better try than going forward, but the position is still supposed to be holdable for white. Now comes knight f8, and it's again, well, sort of a trick from David Anton, but obviously CARLSEN is not falling into this one. So if you were to be too eager to push your pawns, then you are just getting checkmated on the spot. So, but now comes rook f1, eyeing this knight, and now after check, black has to go upwards. And now comes rook g7. And the reason why white has chances to hold this is because this g6 pawn is too weak to protect. So now comes rook g1, and actually after knight d4, it's very hard to find a way to push these pawns. But of course, CARLSEN is Magnus Carlsen, and he's very well known to squeeze and try to win every position, so of course he goes on. Comes g5, knight f5 check, king h3, and knight e3. And after bishop f3, actually king f5, king h4, now some repetition. And after bishop g4 here, actually David Anton probably makes the biggest mistake of the game. His only move to hold the game very clearly would be to play the move king f6, again putting pressure against this pawn. However, he played the move king d4, which gives a little bit of more chance than he should have to CARLSEN, because after rook a1, or had CARLSEN played rook a1, the position is actually very hard to guard now, because this rook is going to giving annoying checks, keeping this king busy, and then at some point you can remove your bishop and push. So after rook a1, the computer says that white is in trouble. However, CARLSEN did not find this move. He played bishop h3, and after this one, David Anton plays e5, and yeah, he's actually still has all the chances to save this. Now the rook goes to the side, and after rook g6, white is threatening to push. And the thing is that, again, you cannot push your pawn, again similar as before. Now after g4, you are getting checkmated with knight f5 check. So very tough to go forward for CARLSEN. Now there comes some checks, and after rook e8, e6, this pawn is just too strong, and actually CARLSEN realizes that it's time to go home. After king e5, he just makes some more moves, and they just simplify the position to a draw. There's nothing more to actually try here after king f3. Well, if you play something like g4, then the king just goes, and it's just going to be all the pawns are are taken, and after king f3, king g5, David Anton made the draw against the world champion. So it was a super interesting game, really of the style of Magnus Carlsen, but David Anton, who is rated around 2680, so almost 200 less than the world champion, managed to actually hold the game. So Carlsen made this draw, so he is actually now not leading the tournament, because the tournament is led by a young Swedish guy, Nils Grandelius, and then comes the big favorites with 1.5 points, Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. So yeah, that's about this game, and then tomorrow I will continue on the coverage of the Tata Steel. So see you then.